Okay, well, let's get started. It's 3 o'clock. Mhm. So welcome everybody to this month's edition of the Buen Vivir, which is the Scientists' Rebellion Turtle Island speaker series, helping us to understand how to live better and not bigger. I'm Sarah Biddle, and I'm currently calling in from the traditional and ancestral lands of the Massachusetts, the original inhabitants of what is now known as Boston and Cambridge. So, in this series, each month we feature an expert speaker delving into topics related to a well-being economy, degrowth, and understanding what a good life is in a time of global upheaval. So, our speakers explore topics at the intersections of social, nature, and economic justice, building societies where fairness, equality, and livable standards are balanced with land and resource rights, environmental protections, and dignity for all. The talks are live streamed to our social media platforms, and past episodes can be found on the SR Turtle Island YouTube page. So today's speaker is Paul Morris, CERP, M.Sc, with over 30 years of expertise in ecology, botany, ecosystem restoration, and regenerative farming. Paul is a seasoned professional dedicated to preserving and restoring our planet's natural ecosystems. He has advised government and community groups in restoration practice and policy across Canada and Mexico, and teaches soil restoration and fertility through the Soil Food Web School and his organization, Planet Healers. So today we're going to have a discussion with Paul, and I would encourage any Q&A. So please put any questions you have in the chat. And for those who are in the Zoom room, if you would also like to participate and ask your questions by voice, that's also possible today. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate being here. I guess a little bit about myself. I'm a restoration ecologist for 30 years. For 20 years, I had a native plant nursery in Canada called Ecological Restoration. We did ecosystem restoration throughout Ontario and different areas across Canada and some into the US. And we were growing about 500,000 plants a year that went out into restoration projects, over 400 different species, from trees and shrubs to aquatic wetland species to different prairie ecosystem species. So we had a full complement of species, and we could restore all the ecosystems in Ontario. And I did that for 20 years. And then eventually I sold the business and I moved on. And I went traveling for a while and went through the US and then down into Mexico. And then I met my wife, and we started an eco project down here and called Resilient Ecosystems Institute. And we also have been restoring. We bought 40 hectares of tropical forest that was degraded. The last 10 years, we've been restoring that ecosystem, watching it as all the birds, wildlife turning. Oh, can you hear me?
You're breaking up.
No?
Okay, let's try that.
So I work with the Soil Food Web. Is basically I was asked, there's a group called the Ecosystem Restoration Communities, which is I think they have around 80 communities worldwide now doing ecosystem restoration projects. And so I was asked by them to create an introduction to ecosystem restoration course. And then they partnered with the Soil Food Web for my introduction to ecosystem restoration course. And so that's been running for 3 years now. And we put hundreds of people through that course. And it's basically taking people through the basic understanding of ecology, because I think there's a huge gap in knowledge in the general population about ecology, just basics, and even in the permaculture, they understand basic ecology, which is kind of the foundation. And you can't restore ecosystems, and you can't good, healthy ecosystem.
Oh, we're losing you again.
So I created this course, and we run it through the last 3 years. And I've also twice, I give one course, the fundamentals of ecosystem restoration, which is basically taking the course and all the ecosystem restoration information and giving them, because it's an online course, I wanted to give them hands-on skills as well. So we brought them out here for a week in the Yucatan, and then in June, I was in Canada. 10 different cultures from around the world, 5 different indigenous communities were represented, and just getting everybody out, getting their hands dirty, and practicing skills, species identification, soil, design, and planting species. Do a restoration project to create healthy ecosystems again in so many of some of the areas we're talking about, or there's an old rail yard that stopped being used in Big City, so we use that as an example. Projects, what a blank slate. How do we? One of the workshop things we did was just saying, here's a blank slate. Okay, now get into a group. What is the process that you need to do to restore this degraded rail yard? Is it toxic chemicals left in the soil? How do you deal with that? Envisioning what you'd like to do with that particular place, and then thinking about all the steps you need to go into it to make it community buy-in, consultation, to get everybody's ideas on the table, create a robust plan that everybody will buy in. Just some of the processes to really get people's juices flowing, and to start to understand what it is that we need to do to heal our planet, because the skills are there. They're not that complicated. They just need to be addressed, brought out into the forefront. For Canada, for example, we've got plenty of money, we've got manpower, interest. People just don't, there's a disconnect. People don't realize, all this environmental destruction that's happening, there's solutions. Solutions are pretty basic. They just take a lot of manpower and a lot of foresight, a lot of planning, and thinking about, what are the goals we're trying to achieve? Is it, we just want to have healthy food? So maybe we're doing culture or syntropic agriculture, or is it, we're trying to restore a city, putting green spaces, creating areas for wildlife through the city, or is it, in agriculture areas, how much land do we need in agriculture? I was, farmer in Ontario. Every farm that I see, there's always an area that's, lower productivity. And they're still plowing it because, requirements, so you plow so much land and you get so much money for that. But there's always a place on properties that had poor soil, too wet, all these different things. And those areas can be restored if you work together with them. So just creating these balances, working with the indigenous communities. It's like they understand the land, but they, the impacts that are there, you need to help them to understand, okay, what are the impacts that are affecting it? How do we stop the impacts? And how do we start restoring the ecosystem back to health? They have certain skills that they know the land, and maybe they even have restoration skills. They're not supported to allow that to happen. From my side, I have the scientific background, and they have the ability to see the land as they see it, see it. It's changing the mindset of people, which is a very hard thing to do, shifting that paradigm away from let's just exploit everything and it's all about me to, you know, maybe you shift it a little bit and it's like, well, maybe I'll do some good things for my neighbors. Maybe I'll do something good, this good thing for my kids. But starting to expand it out to like, you know, we're one species of billions on this planet, and we're taking all the resources for ourselves. You know, we need to figure out how to share and how to work with these living ecosystems to improve them, to regenerate them, as we say, to make them better rather than taking them down and degrading it. I talk about conventional agriculture as it's basically hydroponics now. You know, the soil's a sterile medium, and then you put in your chemicals and you can grow your plant. Well, you can get a plant, yeah, but it's not actually a very healthy plant. It's not a healthy plant. It's full of minerals. You may have the color, you may have all these things, but it doesn't have all the micronutrients that we need to survive. One of the things that I talk about again and again is the microbiome, and how as we restore the microbiome through regenerative practices, through adding back in compost and living matter back into the soil, and even reintroducing microorganisms back into the soil, recreating that healthy ecosystem. But that's completely reflective of our own microbiome within us. And people don't make that connection. You know, healthy soil equals healthy microbiome within us. People don't realize that over 50% of the cells in our body are not our own. They're other microorganisms. And those microorganisms create B vitamins, they break down starches and other materials. And they also release hormones within our body. And they regulate our moods and everything. You know, cravings that you have is probably your microorganism going, well, I want a fruit today. It's telling you what you want to eat. So, and the microbiome within our body has been reduced significantly because the sterility. One of the reasons that I started looking at this more is because I had asthma as a child. And one of the treatments that I'd heard of Sweden is they're actually giving kids dirt and trying to reintroduce the microbiome into the lungs and into their bodies to re-establish that, because it's not actually normal to not have these sort of challenges on our body, to have a completely sterile environment. It's not normal. So re-establishing those connections between let's have healthy soil, let's have healthy fruit, and on those healthy fruit and on those healthy vegetables is all the microbiome. When you eat it, it inoculates your entire microbiome within yourself, your hands. You know, if you're playing and growing your own, playing in the dirt, breathing in the dust from the soil, shaking plants around, knocking the microbiome into the air. All these different things are inoculating you with that microbiome. And we've reduced our microbiome probably by about 50% or more just by not interacting with the environment and taking ourselves out of these, putting ourselves in sterile homes. And especially with COVID, everybody's like washing their hands, afraid of any sort of microbe. So it's just kind of got to the extreme, and now we have to move back a little bit. things. Part of the ecosystem. There is no separation. If there is not that exchange between the ecosystems, we get unhealthy. So I was thinking about that, trying to teach people a little bit about that, expanding people's awareness. It's like, we just don't understand like how much we've altered the landscape. Like I went on a trip from Canada down into Mexico. It's like as you're driving, it's like field, urban area, and the wild areas are like these little tiny postage stamps. Like an example in southern Ontario is, there's one 10-hectare, or actually only 10-acre area of old growth forest in southern Ontario that hasn't been cut. Everywhere else has been completely cut, and most of the forests that you see are second, third, fourth growth forests. And you can tell that because when you walk into the forest, it's flat. Because a normal old growth forest has these hummocks and these depressions. If agriculture's gone in there, they level all that completely, and so it's all homogeneous. Microhabitats, dead woody materials not there on the ground, any nice big trees that have fallen down. So the trees are small, and they haven't reached that size and fallen down again. And then one of the big things when you go into a forest like that is you see that the epiphytes are missing, the lichens, the mosses, all these type of things are missing from the forest here. The forest that we have in the Yucatan, if you go to a healthy forest, every tree has got like epiphytes, different plants growing on the bark, moss, lichens. But the trees in our forest here, because it was all cut down and allowed to regrow, we don't have any epiphytes. So it's like a major component of the ecosystem. It's missing. So organisms, the healthy organisms back in the soil, reintroducing diversity of species. You get these carbon credit projects, initially they were all like, let's plant a big monoculture of super fast growing species. And it's like, well, you're basically creating a dead zone for any biodiversity, creating these monocultures. And then, that's what they've done in northern Ontario. Well, you look around northern Ontario, it's like, it's all tree plantation. There's very little natural forest left up there, except for maybe in the parks. Even the parks like Algonquin, most of it was cut down and then allowed to regrow. They left a few, you go on these trails up there and you see, oh, there's a nice big tree, but really that tree was just tiny. They cut everything around and they left it because it wasn't of interest to it, or maybe it had a split in it or something that, they rejected it. And that's what we've got left. So the genetic diversity that we used to have within those forests is way down. And then you get breeding programs where they're trying to create the perfect tree and selecting for, less and less genetics, just like they do with our vegetables. Genetics. More and more vulnerability, because it's the genetic diversity that is the resilience of the population. If you don't have genetic diversity, you don't have resilience, just like with COVID. Some people got really sick and other people were resistant. So within a population, it's the same thing. If some sort of disease, drought, flooding, somebody's going to be able to survive those conditions if you have genetic diversity. If you have a monoculture, you get one disease in there and you can wipe out the entire crop. That's where the spreading.
Okay.
Helps, gives you a perspective on a different perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I also just the connection between I had never made the connection with myself, but between the microbiomes and the soil and in our bodies. And of course, that makes so much sense. Um, okay, there's a lot of different topics we could talk about. I guess we have some questions in the chat. So I'll start with a question from Susan, who asks, since the forestry industry isn't going away anytime soon, how can we grow better forests back after the fires? Mhm.
Um, well, by adding a diversity of species in there, right now they're putting in monoculture. Okay, we like white pine or we like white spruce, and it's like, well, let's plant the entire forest like that, and that's not natural. Different species have different resistances for fire, and so mixing them all together allows for fire breaks to occur. Maybe the white pine all goes up in smoke, but maybe the spruce or the fir or something else is a little more resistant to being burned. So if you have a diversity of species that you're not as susceptible to fire, it's very hard though, because I worked for the Toronto Conservation Authority doing the ecosystem restoration Meadoway project. It's 17 kilometers that goes through the city of Scarborough. It's a hydro. So I worked on that. And just talking to the forestry people, and it's like, well, we don't have elm, we don't have ash, and now we're losing beech. And it's like all these different species that were, chestnut, all these species that were the climax species with the forest brought in diseases from other places. They've been wiped out, and they're really scratching their head now, going, well, what do we put back, and what kind of an ecosystem can we create if all these species are, they just won't grow properly because they've been wiped out, and these diseases and these insect pests plant them, it's just going to die. So it's like, well, what do we got left? It's a very tricky thing.
Yeah, and I guess what used to grow there with the changing climate conditions might not be able to survive in the future.
Yeah, that and everything's migrating north.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about assisted migration. Move the oaks up into the boreal, and can they survive there, because the soil is not there and the acidity is different. But suddenly, the zone where they can grow is moving hundreds of kilometers north. So they can't grow is also moving hundreds of kilometers. Up in the Arctic, the Arctic's circle is kind of defined by, well, the trees can't grow there anymore, but they're noticing that the trees are starting further and further north as the climate is. But then in the south as well, everything's moving up. The extra hot zone as well. And so all these species are trying to climatize themselves to the growing zone, and not the range they can't. Thinking about how to assist the movement of wildlife, different creatures, maybe even microbiomes further north, different things like that. It's like, as an
Sorry,
ecologist,
your
very
sound cut
challenging.
out. Could you please repeat the last thing that you said?
Sorry, just thinking about, how do we assist the movement of these species, because the
Mm.
movement is so rapid. It's not tens of thousands of years that the climate is changing very slowly. It's very rapid change. So no species can move that fast. Maybe birds can, maybe insects can, but a lot of species can't move that fast. Oak doesn't throw its acorn very far. A squirrel doesn't move very far from the tree.
Yes. Thank you. So we have a couple of questions from Bernadette, who asks, what do you think of the Half Earth Project by E.O. Wilson, Biodiversity Foundation? And also, how do we scale the type of projects you're doing to drastically increase the impact and speed of the transition that we need? And there's also been a suggestion, maybe holding the mic closer would be helpful. Let's try.
Let's see better.
We'll see. It's okay for now.
In terms of the half Earth, restoring or protecting half of the Earth, yes, I think that's very reasonable. I mean, to some people it might seem shocking. Oh, well, let's leave half of the world, but you have to start thinking about what we're leaving. You know, humans have taken all the best areas on the planet. You know, if it has good soil, good growing conditions, you know, good nutrient quality in the soil, we've taken it. So what we're leaving is the rocky areas, the swampy areas, you know, the secondary quality stuff, pieces of land. That's all we're leaving for the rest of the wildlife on the planet. And so it's like, it's no wonder everybody, the rest of the species are declining. You know, like we've lost, you know, 80% of the biomass of wild animals. Millions of species are at risk of extinction. You know, line of insects is, you know, I traveled across Canada. It's like, I think there was 2 spots, and one near the border of Winnipeg, and then there was another spot near at the edge of BC when that transition zone where there was actually insects that were stuck on the windshield. But the rest of the time I was driving, you know, thousands of kilometers going across the country, and I didn't have to clean my windshield. It's like, and I remember, you know, when I was younger, you'd just drive around for a little while and your window would be dirty, and you know, every time you went to the gas station, the guy would clean your window. But now you don't need that. So it's kind of it's really stunning. And you know, when I worked for the Toronto Conservation Authority, I would go for walks down into the river valley that was behind the place, and you know, I'd go walk out for a half an hour, and then I'd come back to work because I had a break for an hour for lunch. And I would go down there, and it's so quiet. I mean, it's on the edge of Toronto, but the impact from the city of Toronto and the impact of agriculture on, it was the Humber River, so it's not a small river, but it was quiet down there. So few birds, so few insects. And I lived in the country, like down near Long Point. And it was, you know, I had a lot of diversity on my property. I restored it to all the property to native species. And so I was used to, you know, hearing creatures all the time, birds flying around. But you go into that river valley that's, you know, you look at it from someone from an outside perspective would say that's natural. From an ecologist point of view, I'd say it's full of invasive species, very few native species. And but the silence, it is really scary. And in the spring, you know, you see ponds, little pools all over as you're walking along the trail, and there's no tadpoles, no frogs calling. Like on my property down there, Long Point, there'd be a puddle that was big enough for tadpoles, and it'd be full of tadpoles. The frogs would be going crazy in the springtime, but there, so people don't realize it. This is the acclimatization that people have. That people don't realize that being that quiet is not normal. They really don't understand. You know, they drive and their windshield is clean and they're happy, but that's not normal.
Yeah. I had
People say things are collapsing. It's like it's already collapsing. It's not like it's going to happen.
yeah.
It's already happening, and we've already, you know, destroyed so much of the biodiversity of this planet. Driving all the way from Canada down into Mexico, it's like all agriculture, all urban area. It's so boring. It's like, oh, another cornfield, all the way from Canada to all the way down. It's like, come on, there's more things you could grow. All that corn and all that soybeans, it's not going for human consumption. It's going for cows. So if you're trying to reduce your impact, not only are the cows clearing forest and they're grazing them on there, but it's the cornfields, it's the soybean fields. All that corn and soy is going to cows. There's a very small percentage that actually humans eat. So if you look around you and you start realizing things like that, it's like we've changed the landscape of this planet significantly. We need to start restoring. We can do it. It's not like we can't do it. It's willpower. It's people actually going out, okay, I've got clients coming in and they, oh, I'll come and I'll try a few native plants and I'll buy, half a dozen plants. And then they take them home, they plant them in their garden, and then the next year they would come back and they'd be like, wow, there was birds and butterflies and bees. They swarmed all over my native plants, and the other plants, the petunias and the roses, that have been cultivated so much that they don't have any nectar anymore. Nothing. The native plants, the native species are keyed to these native plants, and you put them in your garden and they come. And when I was doing wetland restoration in the city of Toronto, I was putting these wetland plants in this wetland I was planting, and you'd look behind me, and I don't know where they came from, but there's dragonflies were landing on my plants and they're laying eggs because they're so keyed to the native plants. And I'm like, where the heck are these dragonflies coming from in this urban area? It's like they must be like searching everywhere for just for these plants. So it's really stunning just how keyed native species are. Not the cultivars, not the, you got cardinal flower, it's bright red, attracts hummingbirds, but then you'll get cultivars of cardinal flower, and then you get native species coming to it because they tweaked it in a way that the wildlife doesn't recognize it anymore. Even the, black-eyed Susan, like met so many black-eyed Susan cultivars, but the wildlife doesn't have the keys the native species have for the wild.
That's fantastic. So we have a question from social media. Do you think the Homegrown National Park project started by Doug Tallamy in the US is a viable approach to increasing biodiversity? This is a project that encourages people to plant native species in their home landscapes.
For native species, I talked about this in various different things on my YouTube as well, about just creating a postage stamp, a little garden, even planting a few native plants in a pot in your apartment, sticking it outside. It's something. Species have got to move across places like the city of Toronto. They have to get across there, and it's like a biological desert for them. No water, no food, no nectar, no seeds. The native plants, they provide the nectar, they provide, for caterpillars, I also talk about caterpillars. It's like, you want caterpillars on your native plants, everybody like sprays the heck out of them. If you don't have caterpillars, you don't have butterflies. So you need food sources for those caterpillars. So having those within the city, giving, migratory birds. Toronto's actually a migratory pathway, and they flow through the city, and it's like, where are they going to get water? Where are they going to get seeds for food to fuel their journey, especially where the city of Toronto is situated? They've got to, after they get through the city of Toronto, they've got to fly all the way across Lake Ontario. So you've given them a biological desert, which used to be a rich wetland ecosystem, multiple wetland ecosystems that were rich in biodiversity that they could fuel up and then cross Lake Ontario, or in terms of where I was down Long Point, it's a major flyway as well. You know, that's all those barges still intact, so they can land, fatten up, and then fly across the lake and survive and make it across the lake. Not too bad. So providing even just a small bit of habitat within your backyard is really important for those different species. You know, a butterfly, how far can the butterfly go without any nectar and without any water? It's not very far. They need to have all those spots. Hummingbirds are the same. They can't go very far without having some sort of nectar source to keep them going in the migration south.
Thank you. So earlier you mentioned that you and your wife had bought a property in Brazil, and I was curious, like, what were the steps that you took to restoring it, and were there like some lessons that you learned that you could share?
Sorry, I kind of missed the, what's the
Um,
question?
oh, I was curious to hear more about your restoring of the land that you and your wife bought. Um,
Down in the Yucatan or
oh,
in Canada?
in Yucatan.
Oh, in the Yucatan. Well, when we first got here, the cows had basically eaten the vegetation down to the dirt. So the dirt was red when we first got here, in case of very little organic matter. And so one of the things we did was fence off the cows, so protecting the place first from the disturbance, and then slowly starting to collect seed from other trees that we would find in different places, you know, great big trees that had lots of seed, you know, healthy trees. It's because there weren't any on our property, so we had to go out into different communities. A lot of times the Mayan people would have, you know, a peach tree that, you know, it's a sacred tree, and they would put it in their town. It'd be a great big one, so it's nice and healthy. So we collect some seed, different species that, you know, you look for really healthy examples, good genetic diversity, so you know that it'd be fairly resistant if it could survive for that long. And then we bring it back into our property, and I created a little nursery, and then it's growing the plants in the nursery. And we had an ecosystem restoration camp where we will have a dozen different people out, and they stayed for a week, and we did all those plants that I grew in the nursery. Actually, I had interns and volunteers that came many times. International people would come, and they would have to stay for a month, stay for 4 months, and, you know, help us doing different parts of the project, collecting seed, growing plants, and then doing things like the ecosystem restoration community workshop. Teach them restoration and actually go out, plant trees out into the natural area, starting to kickstart the restoration. So 10 years we were doing that, so we keep doing that. And basically we focused on the back half of the property, doing the restoration on that. And you can see the difference, because it's 10 hectares, it's 20 hectares, sorry. So it's a lot of work, a lot of planting you have to do, and a lot of maintenance, because we have 6 months of dry where basically it doesn't really rain. So when you plant the plants, a lot of times you need to supplement watering. And that's why we went through a whole process of like, okay, how do we maintain moisture in the soil? So it's like, okay, first we were adding biochar, then we were creating our super brew fertilizer to help enhance the microbiome within the soil, and then the biochar is enhancing the microbiome. So you want to have a strong microbiome, so that's putting a lot of carbon into the soil, and then you want vegetation around, so that's growing up and dying, putting a lot more carbon into the soil, watering it in the dry season to keep the cranberry tree growing. So many processes that needs to, just thinking about, you know, looking around, you know, where is a reference ecosystem? And in the Yucatan, like most places, there is no reference ecosystem. I kept asking biologists, where is a fairly intact ecosystem still? And there really is none, because they cut down all the forests here and they're growing cattle on them. So there really is no reference ecosystem close by. So I would go for a couple hours in one direction, and I found one near a coast. It looked fairly healthy, but with moisture conditions slightly different. And then another example was a couple hours to the north of us, but again, it's slightly more moisture. They're more similar, but it's not exactly the same as where we are. So it's kind of detective work. Okay, what should this ecosystem actually look like once we do restore it? Again, you're restoring an ecosystem. It's really a lot of detective work. What was actually here before is really a big question. You can put all the species back, but was that what the ecosystem actually? How many species are we missing that we just don't even know about, or how many species? This is a big issue in the nursery industry. It's like, well, I'll grow the pretty ones because I know I can sell them. Whereas, when I did my nursery, it's like, well, I'm going to grow this flower with a green little tiny flower, because I know it has an important ecosystem function, and these other grasses that nobody really cares about, I'm going to grow them as well because they have important ecosystem functions. But you're trying to convince the landscape architects, trying to convince the landowners, buy these plants to put them into your ecosystem is much harder. All the black-eyed Sues and cardinal flowers, all these things that are typical people would buy. But all the unusual ones that I would keep growing, they're mostly put them on my property.
There was a question in the chat asking if you could talk a little bit more about the biochar. Is it beneficial for all soils and locations, or just some?
Yep. I have a biochar video online, and we go through the whole process of making biochar using pyrolysis, which is a burn without oxygen, so that you're just saving carbon. You burn with oxygen, the carbon turns into ash. So you have non-oxygen burn. And then once you've got your charcoal, basically, it's not the same as commercial charcoal. It's much different. It has a lot more porosity. It's just a high temperature burn, whereas commercial charcoal is a low temperature burn. So it's much different. That high porosity allows for it to be super absorbed. It's basically activated carbon, like you have in your water filter, so it filters out pollution, toxins. But in the garden, what it is a super sponge. So we started using biochar because of the fast draining soil we had, and because of the dry season, we wanted to sponge water. So that was our primary purpose. But then biochar is also a sponge for nutrients. So when you have the rainy season, normally all the nutrients go right through into the aquifer. So, but we want biochar holds those nutrients. So if you put compost or you put manure, whatever it is on top of your garden, that carbon, the biochar holds onto that, and it doesn't let it flow all the way through. It's kind of like a water filter. It captures the nutrients as it's moving by. But if you use biochar, take that carbon right out of the kiln and stick it into your garden, guess what it's going to do? It's going to suck all the nutrients out of your soil. This is the biggest mistake that most people make. They put the biochar right into the garden, and then all their plants are yellow because it sucked all the nitrogen out of the soil. They go, oh, it doesn't work. But what we do is 3 months of charging. So we use our super fertilizer, which is molasses, urine, and all sorts of microorganisms, and then use compost and manure, all these different good things to sawdust. We mix it all together and then leave it for 3 months. It charges the biochar. So now what you have is activated, and it's full of microorganisms and it's full of, you know, all these little creatures that are running around in there eating the compost and breaking it down for you. So then you're taking that enriched medium full of mycorrhizae, full of different creatures, full of nutrients, then you put it in your garden. And now it's a slow release fertilizer. And slowly releasing in the plants and mycorrhizae can break that nutrient off and feed the plants. So in the Yucatan, it was exceptional. We had a squash and some corn, the native Mayan corn. So the neighbor was growing it, and he would get, you know, a squash about yay big, and then we put it into our biochar mix, and it was like pumpkin sized. We showed it to him, and he's like, "That's not the same thing." I said, "Yeah, you gave me the seed," and then he gave us his corn, which is about yay big, and then when we grow it, you know, it's double the size. His corn is like 3 feet tall, and ours was 6 feet tall. So the amount of productivity you can get from using biochar and compost and super brew fertilizer is actually really incredible how much you can increase. And we also did this in Canada. We were staying at the Whole Village Eco Village for a year. So we worked on their gardens, and we talked to them to say, you know, we have such incredible gardens because we put the biochar in there. And so, you know, it was sandy soil. It was a bit richer, so we didn't quite get, you know, double the size. But I mean, it improved the water capacity, the microbiome, the nutrient capacity of exceptional. I think we got a ton of tomatoes. So if your soil's perfect already, then the biochar is not going to do a lot. But if it's nutrient deficient, you know, if you've got a farm that's used toxic chemicals and you're trying to convert it to another thing, the biochar actually will bind those toxic chemicals and hold it, and then the microbiome can break it down, knock off different pieces of it, and render it inert. So it's not moving into your water table. So different things. It's kind of I think biochar is great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Okay, so I think we have time for a few more questions if anyone has some for Paul. Otherwise, so you mentioned you have a YouTube channel. How can people find you online?
Planet Healers.
Planet Healers.
So Planet Healers on YouTube.
That's great.
Biochar video, and there's a lot of videos of me talking about different restoration projects and the processes. There's the super fertilizer. There's how to collect the microbiome. So going into healthy sites and then taking samples and how not to damage the site. You really only need like a teaspoon of soil. Within this teaspoon of soil, you have millions of microorganisms. Then I just bring it back, and then I'm putting it onto a rice substrate. And they grow like crazy because it's medium that they make, and you can propagate very easily.
So there's a question from Bernadette. When we're thinking about like how can we scale this? So is there a larger network of folks doing similar work?
Yep, the ecosystem restoration communities.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned in the beginning, there's like I think 80 or 90 places all around the world doing ecosystem restoration.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, the course that I developed was to train people in ecosystem restoration, fundamentals of ecosystem restoration. And that's part of their course. And they also have another course that's free. It's called the roadmap training. And I did the design module for that course. So they go through, if you want to become an ecosystem restoration community, it goes through, you know, how all the planning processes that you need to think about, how do you get funding? How do you do restoration? How do you do permaculture? Different things like that. How do you create a community?
Yeah.
All these
Thank
things.
you. Thank you for repeating that. I'm definitely going to check that out.
Yeah, it's called roadmap training.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The ecosystem restoration course is with the soil food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks.
Soil food web school.
Thanks for sharing those links. So we have a question from social media. If people were to do just one thing for the environment, what would you recommend? Paul? I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
I think it's the audio is breaking up a bit again.
How's that?
That's good. Thanks.
Okay, I turned that on and off again. There, I just typed in so the soil food web school is on there, and then I put my YouTube channel.
Thank you. So if people
But
were
one thing that I would do, so many things I would do.
I know.
I guess just living simply and trying to figure out how to live in harmony with the other species that we live together with on this planet, to understand that there is no separation. I know people want to separate ourselves from nature and create little bubbles, or live all AI and things like that, but we can't take ourselves out of our ecosystems. Our ecosystems support everything that we need to live: our food, our air, clean water, clean soil, all these things that we need to be considered to be healthy. If we don't have healthy ecosystems, we don't have resilient ecosystems, then we're not going to be healthy and resilient as well. So just thinking about how you can reintegrate yourself back into nature. A lot of that is just going for a walk in nature, trying to understand. One of the first things I tell people to do is walk the land. It's not run in with a plan. It's walk the land and start to understand, what is this piece of land that I'm working with? If you don't have a piece of land, go to a park. Understand what's going on there. With birds, look at the birds, how they're reacting. Just watching the ecosystem, thinking about, not just what you need, but thinking about what other creatures need to survive. Is there, trees for them to nest? Is there, wildflowers for them to get seed from? Is there nectar for the butterflies? What is it that's missing in, your particular ecosystem, your home, your apartment? Apartments are sterile little things. How can you make it a little bit better for wildlife? Just putting a dish of water on your porch, maybe, my mother, there was actually squirrels. She had these porch cushions, and they climbed all the way up. I think she was on the 4th floor. They climbed all the way up, made a hole in her porch cushion, and nested in there, had babies. They've been doing that for years. She's kind of just left that cushion alone. It's their nest habitat. So, just how do you work with wildlife? How do you make something that not just for you, but for someone else? How do you move beyond yourself? Is the real question. Because fulfillment in life is not just about me. When I went traveling, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to enjoy the tourist spots and everything. But then I started volunteering for different organizations, helping them build with cow, doing bamboo construction, permaculture, and all these things. And it's the giving back. That's what strengthens your heart. That's what creates the compassion, the love for not just the people, but for the animals, for the entire planet. It's just living the place you live instead of, trying to isolate yourself and be part of the ecosystem that we exist in. There's no other planet in our galaxy, in our solar system. And it's definitely not within our lifetime. There's anybody going to ever see one of those. Maybe there is another planet. We're never going to see it. Not our lifetime, not our children, not our grandchildren. So all we've got is these barren rocks around us. And you think, well, let's go to Mars. There's no life there. We need life to live. You want to live on Mars, you got to bring everything from this planet that you need to survive on that planet. So just take that out of your head. Restore this planet. Keep it healthy. We have a beautiful paradise here. We're destroying it. Find another way.
I think I resonated so much with what you just said. Thank you so much. I think that's a good spot to wrap it up. So thank you, Paul. And please join us next month. We'll have a presentation called Before They Vanish, Our Disappearing Biodiversity, with the speaker, Dr. Gerardo Ceballos. And Dr. Ceballos is a professor at the National Autonomous University of Mexico and the author or co-author of 52 books. They're a specialist in animal conservation, and his work has led to the protection of areas covering 2% of Mexico's land. He promotes ecological literacy through his organization, Stop Extinction. So I think that'll be a great topic. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Paul. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay. Does that mean the streaming is